Hey there, econ students. In this video, we're going to be talking more about the natural rate of unemployment. We'll focus specifically on what factors can cause a country's NRU to change. Enjoy the video. Please subscribe to my channel and head over to econclassroom.com for more great resources for economics students and teachers. In this video, we want to talk about the factors that can cause a country's natural rate of unemployment to change. Let's start by reviewing the definition of the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate, or the NRU, is the unemployment rate that will prevail when an economy is producing at its full employment potential level of output. It consists of those who are structurally unemployed in the economy and frictionally unemployed. One thing we can observe is that different countries will have different natural rates of unemployment. To better understand this, let's look at some examples of real-world countries. Here we have data from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We can see the unemployment rates experienced in 3 countries over 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. Notice that Japan has the lowest level of unemployment over the very long run relative to the other 2 countries here. Only for a couple of years does the United States unemployment rate dip lower than that in Japan. The United States averages unemployment rates of around 5 to 6% over the last 20 years, whereas Spain has much higher average unemployment rates, ranging from 14% to as high as 21%, dipping down to as low as 8.2%. The levels of unemployment that these countries experience over the very long run could be considered their natural rates of unemployment. Spain's natural rate of unemployment should be somewhere in between 10% and 20%, maybe around 15%, because that's about the average that the country has experienced over the long run. Of course, in years in which Spain experiences a recession, such as in the mid-1990s and again in the late 2000s, Spain's unemployment rate rises above its natural rate into the 20% range. And of course, there are years in which Spain's unemployment rate has fallen below its natural rate of 15% into the single digits at a couple points. These would be periods of expansion in Spain's business cycle. The U.S., we can see a similar pattern. During periods of recession in the early 1990s, and again in the early 2000s, and again in the late 2000s, the U.S. unemployment rate rose to a level higher than its natural rate of 5 or 6%. And the same for Japan, although Japan has a slightly different experience. In the early 1990s, Japan's unemployment rate was around 2%, and it rose steadily throughout the 90s as Japan's economy experienced what's called stagnation, where the economy did not grow for over a decade in the 1990s and actually only grew very slightly in the 2000s, causing Japan's unemployment rate to dip back down to 4% by the mid-2000s. So we have 3 different countries with 3 different natural rates of unemployment. What are the characteristics of different countries that might explain why some countries have higher NRUs than others? And what could cause a country's natural rate of unemployment to change over time? That's what we're going to talk about next. Let's summarize our observations from the chart that we just looked at. We can see that Spain had the highest natural rate of unemployment of around 15%. The United States was somewhere in the middle, with an NRU of around 5 to 6%, and Japan had the lowest NRU over the last 20 years. The average long-run unemployment rate, that to which it returns when the economy is producing at its full employment level, was around 3 to 4%. So what are some factors that can cause changes in a country's NRU in the long run? Well, first we need to point out that the natural rate of unemployment is not something that's going to change in the short run. Whereas the actual unemployment rate at any particular given time can fluctuate based on changes in the business cycle, the natural unemployment rate to which the country returns when it's producing at its full employment level is not something that's going to change in the short run. So there are some things that can cause it to change over time, though. And the first we want to discuss is changes in labor force characteristics. For example, we know that the natural rate includes those who are structurally and frictionally unemployed. So if there is something that changes the level of frictional unemployment in the economy, such as more young people in the labor force, tends to increase the level of frictional unemployment because young people tend to move between jobs more than people later on in their careers do. People of older ages tend to be more secure and stay in one job for a longer period of time, whereas young people just entering the labor force, first they have to find their first job, during which time they're frictionally unemployed, and they tend to move between jobs more frequently, also causing frictional unemployment. Another change in the labor force characteristics that could cause the natural rate of unemployment to increase could be an increase in the number of minorities or women or immigrants entering the labor force. We could just say that an increase in the number of people entering the labor force. This is kind of an extension of the increase in the number of young people entering the labor force. If groups that historically did not participate in the labor force start to enter the labor force in larger numbers, we're also going to see an increase in the level or the degree of frictional unemployment. Another factor that could cause a change in the NRU is a change in the skill set or the abilities of workers in a country relative to what's in demand from the country's employers. For example, if technology changes faster than the ability of workers to adapt to the changes in technology, we would expect to see structural unemployment increase. So we could say that changing technology leads to changing demands for labor. This could lead to increased structural unemployment. Another factor that could cause increased structural unemployment and an increase in the NRU is the effects of globalization. Globalization often leads to the outsourcing or the offshoring of the production of goods and services. As lower wage workers in foreign countries start producing more and more of the goods and services consumed by a nation, the workers who were previously employed in the production of those goods and services might find themselves structurally unemployed. Their skills simply do not match what is in demand from the nation's actual producers at a given period of time. So changes in labor force characteristics, the composition of the labor force, how many young people in the labor force, whether women or minorities or immigrants start entering the labor force in increasing numbers, these things can cause the level of frictional unemployment to change. And globalization and changes in technology can cause an increase in structural unemployment. Now, the factors described here would cause the natural rate to increase in a nation, but of course these could work in opposite ways. Once minorities and women and immigrants become integrated into the labor force, the level of frictional unemployment could decrease, and once workers become more skilled and adapt to the levels of technology in a country or become more competitive in the global economy, the level of structural unemployment could decrease. So the NRU can increase or decrease based on the described changes in labor force characteristics. But there are some things related to public policy or government policy that can affect the level of the natural rate of unemployment as well. And one of those is the extension of transfer payments. For example, if unemployment benefits are very generous, then workers who become unemployed would likely remain frictionally unemployed for longer if there are generous unemployment benefits being provided to them. In other words, they're not going to be willing to accept lower wages very quickly. Therefore, the level of frictional unemployment could be much higher over a longer period of time. Another consideration is factors such as the minimum wage. A country with a very generous minimum wage, workers are likely to remain frictionally unemployed for longer when they lose their jobs because employers can't simply lower the wages that they offer their workers and rehire workers following a decrease in demand for their goods. So frictional and structural unemployment can be affected by the level of government intervention in the labor market. Minimum wages and generous transfer payments such as unemployment benefits can actually inhibit the ability of labor markets to adjust to changing demand for labor. In this video, we introduced the factors that could affect the level of natural rate of unemployment in a country. We redefined NRU. We looked at how the NRUs are vastly different across different countries based on labor force characteristics and the amount of government intervention in labor markets.
Here we go.